Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 18th, 2023. Time for another show, and in fact, time for me to hand out another Blue Sky invitation code. Just seconds before going on the air, I decided to check in on some of my incoming email. Great responses, as always, from all of you, and I got one more code. It was just issued to me, so I'm going to hand this one out, so that's good news. You know who you are, or though it's possible that you don't yet, or maybe just metaphysically, like you don't really know who, are exploring who you are. Well, anyway, you'll, I continue to get these codes, and I continue to hear from other people who have codes to spare. I now have given out all the ones that I've been issued, once I emailed this one out. Anyway, but, yes, by the way, if you're interested in joining Blue Sky, I mean, I don't really mean to be an evangelist for Blue Sky. I am still a little bit concerned that, the privately owned social media thing, I mean, at its heart, I recognize that the Mastodon organizational principle is a better one, in that no, mercurial billionaire will be able to shut it down or tell you what is or isn't allowed. But, by the same token, it's a little chaotic, and it's never really caught on outside of the extremely online, and that's okay. I mean, that's really all Twitter ever really was. At least the people I was talking to and listening to and hearing from via Twitter. So, not the worst thing in the world. I continue to maintain a presence there, and I think it's a great place to be and monitor and talk to people, and different kinds of conversations going on at Blue Sky. But if you are interested in taking a peek to see what's going on, I mean, who wouldn't want to peek under the tent, right? So by all means, go ahead and ask, and if I don't have any, we can spread the word via the KITM hashtag, which may, I think, actually work as well. I mean, it should work, right, on Blue Sky. Blue Sky, the reason I like it, very comfortable, feels like Twitter, even though the engagement numbers aren't there like they used to be on Twitter. But then we found out half of the engagement on Twitter was fake anyway. But you get the idea. Okay, things to catch up on today. Well, let's see, no speaker elected. They tried yesterday, and I didn't get a chance to sit down and watch it, but I did get a chance to watch people watching it. I was on the move yesterday, and things were a little screwy as we went out to college campus, nameless college campus, and took care of business there. But they had the vote. Jordan fell short. I think it was a good thing to do yesterday, reading through, I don't remember, one of the online industry rags here in DC, Axios, Punchbowl, I don't know, one of the others, laid out, I think, a good, viewer's guide. Here's probably what's going to happen. Here's probably why it's going to happen. Here's the benchmarks, to measure against. They gave us the statistics from McCarthy's run so that you would be able to tell in the end, well, how did he do relative to McCarthy? So I suppose we can then guess how long might this go on. Like we know it's now famous 15 rounds of voting for McCarthy. And in the first couple of rounds, they told us, he netted about 200 votes. And if you should take a look and see, does Jordan net around 200, even if he doesn't make it across the threshold of is it still 217 that they're looking for? It's usually 218 in the full house, and I don't know, people keep mentioning 217, so I imagine there's some vacancies, and there usually are. So anyway, he didn't make it. He made it to about 200, so I guess you could extrapolate from that, for instance, well, it could take several rounds of voting, maybe up to 15, maybe more, if there's ever success in this. And of course, also they reminded everybody that as goofy and stupid and ineffectual as Kevin McCarthy was, he was the kind of goofy, stupid, ineffectual speaker that people could say, I like the guy. He's goofy, stupid, and ineffectual, but I like the guy. But Jim Jordan's brand of goofy, stupid, and ineffectual, it rubs people the wrong way, a different way anyway. if not necessarily the wrong way. There are many ways to rub suboptimally, I guess. And he's found one of them. He's abrasive, bullying. People don't like him. He's just generally not, a person people want to be around. And envisioning somebody like that getting across the finish line, in theory, where members of Congress are free to vote their conscience, is difficult to imagine. On the other hand, among a conference where bullying and threats, sometimes threats of physical violence, are prevalent, well, it's a little easier to see them getting across the threshold because violence. We've learned over and over in this country and around the world, it's unfortunate as much as we try to step away from it. Violence appears to work pretty well in terms of getting things done in the short term if it sentences you to, die by the sword. But there's plenty of people who are, very eager sword brokers, I guess, and love diving into this. So we have that problem here domestically. We have it writ large internationally. So there's violence everywhere. We could make the whole day about violence, but let's try and take our minds off it a little bit. Anyway, Greg Dworkin is here. I imagine violence undergirds everything, so it's probably part of your report too. So, but we'll deal with it as maturely as possible. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm okay. How do you? I keep saying good morning, everybody. War is happening. Discord in America,
This is true. That things could be worse, yes, but things may get worse pretty soon.
Yeah, right. So you won't have to wait long. That's the good news.
So on the one hand, on the other hand. So how many Republicans does it take to change a light bulb?
Oh, first of all, who took my light bulbs and how dare you? And I want the old ones back. So I don't know, probably all of them.
The answer is 5, but it has to be by recorded vote.
Okay, that's it?
Yeah, because if you have 5 Republicans voting with the Democrats to make Patrick McHenry Speaker,
were we going to do that?
McHenry becomes Speaker, at least acting temporary pro tem Speaker.
Oh, okay. All right. I was hoping we weren't offering that one.
Elected Speaker pro tem.
There are such things.
Something.
Yeah, right. Well, back in the weird days of the 1800s, we did a lot of things, and that was one of them.
And once he's elected Speaker pro tem, I still don't think he's in the succession to presidency, but at least he can move bills.
Yeah. Well, we had it covered.
If Speaker pro tem can. There was a chart on this that we were talking about when it first came up.
Okay.
About whether or not he can swear people in. I'm not really sure what his powers are, but they're more than what he has now because the House says he doesn't have any.
X-ray vision.
Therefore, it would be something to talk about after 11 o'clock today, after Jim Jordan loses his second vote and gets embarrassed.
Huzzah.
It's going to be suggested that perhaps the way out of this morass short term.
Yeah.
It's like a short-term CR. It's a short-term Speaker pro tem for
Sure.
Patrick McHenry. Give him 45 days. Let him get the next CR plus Israel and Ukraine aid, blame him, kick him out, and then at least we have some breathing room. And that may be the only way out for them.
Well, it's been suggested in the past, and sure, they can do it. And we're still covered by saying the House can do whatever it wants. And if it makes up a completely nonsensical solution but puts together a majority for it, dumb as it seems, that's the answer.
The triumvirate. Newt Gingrich.
Oh.
Paul Ryan.
Triumvirate. Yeah.
John Boehner.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea. They should do McHenry.
Okay.
They've endorsed it.
I don't like McHenry, but what are you going to do?
Absolutely nothing, mind you, but it's good PR.
Sure.
It's good PR for the CR.
Yeah, it makes some sense. It it removes the panic of oh my God, we can't do anything. It was never really true because you could always get to the solution, but it took a while.
There's a history of doing this in the past. Look at 18.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, fine, sure.
Uh-huh.
There's a history of Dennis Hastert being speaker, but you're not going to talk about that. Selective history.
I don't know. Elise Stefanik might.
Elise Stefanik is so funny. I mean, she is just lurching from this candidate to that candidate. I can't wait for her next tweet saying, all hail the new Speaker pro tempore, Patrick McHenry. She doesn't know who to suck up to.
Yeah.
And her career is broken now because she hitched her star to McCarthy. And who's going to want her in leadership?
Yeah, that I don't know. Nobody, I don't think, but she is in leadership, and so there's nothing you can do about it, I guess. But I understand. Yeah, first of all, you got. I did happen to see on the where were we? YouTube page, I guess, where we store podcasts. That a commenter using the YouTube comment section. High praise for your discussion of Stefanik on Monday and her whole I can't decide who to suck up to. That got a gold star from one of the listeners. So
good.
Well done there. And it turned out to be true. And then Stefanik, I understand, gave a weird, bizarre, rambling speech.
It was more than bizarre and rambling. You know what she did?
I don't really. I missed it.
She said, Jim, now realize the context. I mentioned Dennis Hastert.
Yes.
And Ohio State, Ohio State wrestlers have mentioned their issues with Jim Jordan in the past.
Right.
So Stefanik says, you need to vote for Jim Jordan. He's a fighter. He's a brawler. Think about his wrestling career. He's really good at fighting. And all the Democrats groaned and said, wrestling career? Do you know about his wrestling career?
Well, I'm sure when he was wrestling, his career was probably okay. It was when he was a coach where a problem arose. But yeah, you don't say, you really just shouldn't be saying
don't
wrestling.
Remind people of that. That's why they don't like him.
That's incredible. Although that sometimes I did hear about that part. And then I did wonder, is this Elise Stefanik using I'm crazy and stupid as cover for I just stabbed Jim Jordan in the back and I'm going to be the speaker or what? But I just don't think she's there yet.
No.
She's just dumb, maybe. That's it.
So let me read you some headlines from Politico and other places.
Okay.
And I have to say, one good thing about Politico, Punchbowl, and some of the gossip sheets
they're printed.
Is that they're really good, along with people like Sahil Kapoor and Steve Dennis.
Oh, okay.
And some other reporters who are
very good ones
in the hallways who are trying to corral and question Republicans as they go in and out of the building. They're very good at keeping us up with what's going on. So Republicans ramp up search for an escape hatch from speaker chaos. A bipartisan solution to the GOP's leadership problem still sounds far-fetched to most, but then again, so does Jim Jordan's prospects of winning.
Yeah.
Right? And this is from the 13th.
People.
Centrists are signaling they're open to a deal. There are no moderates. There's only non-radical right and radical right. But that turns out to still be true. This one from today, Jim Jordan's allies tried strong-arming his GOP critics. It backfired.
Yeah.
And that's really the point. The title of the pundit roundup I had today was Moderates Always Cave Except When They Don't. And I have a picture of Jim Jordan with two of his aides speaking behind him at the top of that. And I said, why don't you write your own caption? Mine is, I can't stand him. What about you? And the other one says, I can't stand him either, but hey, it's a living.
I guess so. One of them's masked. Look at that.
Yeah, well, back in the day. So,
is that from an old picture? Okay.
Oh, I'm sure it is. It's a Getty image. I don't know how old it is, but Jim Jordan's allies tried to strong-arm him. It backfired. The one thing that will never work with me, if you try to pressure me, if you try to threaten me, then I shut off, said Mario Diaz-Balart. That's the kind of thing you say only if you think you have the votes.
Okay, and I learned yesterday that he's MDB now. Mario
MDB. So I'm very brave when I think that I've won.
Oh, okay.
I will never say this if I think I'm losing. Jim Jordan's allies attempted to badger House Republicans into making him speaker. Those tactics backfired on Tuesday and could soon doom his speakership push outright. They're saying it out loud. The arm-twisting campaign, which in many cases included veiled threats of primary challenges, was meant to rally support behind Jordan's candidacy. Instead, it has put the judiciary chair's bid on life support and threatened to plunge House Republicans deeper into turmoil.
You know, the threats of primaries, that's a threat you can make when you're speaker. Or you know, an inevitable speaker. But, you know, if you don't really control the apparatus, it might happen.
Well, here's the interesting paragraph in that story.
Okay. Well,
Some
good.
Republicans chalked up the frustration to a lack of understanding on the part of both Jordan and high-profile conservatives off the Hill. That's code for Sean Hannity.
Oh, okay.
About how less conservative colleagues operate. Some Jordan opponents said they hadn't received a call from him directly about their concerns with his leadership, particularly on government funding. Jordan wasn't trying to deal with them,
Oh.
which is the currency along with intimidation on the Hill.
Yeah. I
Right?
mean,
So
two
basically
different
what they're
schools
saying
of
is,
thought,
look,
let's say.
we're cowards with no moral compass and don't care a whit about policy, said the conservatives. Why aren't they? And if you think that means they understand Democrats any better, I got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I guess. And there's not much difference. It's funny. I think they share that emptiness when it comes to policy when the moderates say, well, it's not that I agree with him on policy or could be brought to agree with him on policy. What I want is a phone call to make me look like I have pull.
Well,
don't know.
I mean,
It's
you'd
kinda
understand
weird.
it more if you think of it as high school lunchroom politics. But this is from the New York magazine, Jim Jordan by Ben Jacobs. Jim Jordan didn't just lose, the hard right did as well.
Oh.
On Monday night, Marjorie Taylor Greene was confident Jim Jordan would become Speaker on Tuesday. You have to remember, on the one hand, Republicans are always confident, and on the other hand, they can't count.
Okay.
I think somebody asked Nancy Pelosi about this whole mess, and she just rolled her eyes and said, I think they're getting a lesson in arithmetic.
Yeah.
While there were a lot of dissidents within the Republican conference, 55 had said they'd refused to vote for Jordan in a secret ballot last week. Marjorie Taylor Greene was sure they would come around. I think when we get to the floor, these people that have been saying they refused to vote for Jim Jordan, they're not going to have the courage to say that. And it turned out they had the courage. And
Yeah. Well,
many of the hard right, radical right Republicans in Congress and outside of Congress were quoted in the press, anonymously, of course,
Oh, well.
as, look, they're moderates. Of course they're going to fold.
Yeah. That was the expectation. Sure.
They didn't. And we talked
are they
about this.
doing?
We talked about the fact that there were some Appropriations Committee people that simply weren't going to. And that happened. They held firm.
Yeah. Well, I was worried because we thought that the Armed Services guy
Armed
was gonna
Services
be
caved and
like that,
Appropriations
but he
didn't.
Yeah.
Interestingly
I guess
enough.
the top seats. Well, they didn't want to
But
lose
the
their
other
chairs.
dynamic is that some of the people who caved on the first vote.
Yes.
And they're prepared, if he didn't win, to say no on the second vote.
Or cave.
And that's what he was dealing with, and that's why there wasn't a second vote last night. If you have the votes, you vote. If you don't have the votes, you declare whatever you can declare. What is it? Recess, moratorium, the acting temporary speaker pro tem can turn the lights off. I don't know what he's allowed to do or
Invisible
not
man
allowed
on
to
second
do, but they
base.
decided to go away.
Yeah.
Why?
Okay.
Because he didn't have the votes.
They should just holographic speaker. Can they do this? Possibly.
Well, you can on Star Trek.
Yeah.
Just go down to the holodeck.
That's it.
Call up
Well,
Daniel Webster.
Okay. But this speaker is
Henry Clay,
holographic
even better.
Tupac Shakur. So
Yeah. So
we had
20
it in
Republicans,
storage.
20, a much larger number than people
Nice.
expected. And I was watching the roll call, and it was pretty amazing. And you'd have people you didn't expect stand up and say something like Tom Emmer. Or
Was Tom Emmer saying that? Did Tom Emmer write
Lee
that?
Zeldin. He got a vote.
Yeah, I saw that.
mean, it was really
I didn't see
anybody
it, but I
but
saw
Jordan.
that somebody typed it out online. Oh my God, what? They're just calling out other names. That happens.
Yeah.
Although usually it happens when, there's a lock on the speakership and somebody wants to throw a protest vote. Okay. So yeah, more than I thought were going to hold out. It really started to look like people were caving, but then after the vote, it became clearer that, okay, so that was Jordan's whip operations propaganda campaign. They did get a few people to flip, but they trumpeted it in a way that made it look like you should expect everybody else to flip too, and they didn't.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing,
They fooled
though.
us.
And of course,
Well,
it started with
I got worried.
Don Bacon from Nebraska,
Oh,
who interestingly
Everything's
said,
better
you
if it
know,
starts
I wish
with
my
bacon."
name was Zakin so I could go last. But I'll go first. No.
All right. Yeah.
But there is a way to do that.
Yes.
Apparently, you explained this to me. You're the expert on process. But what happened is, for example, Victoria Spartz was called.
Yes.
She refused to answer. They skipped her. She got to get a vote right at the end, because then they go and say, okay, here are the people that haven't voted. So there is a process to name yourself Zakin. You could just say, I'm going last.
Right.
But you only do that if you want to put your finger to the wind and see what's going on before you vote.
Yes.
So these brave souls who decided to not hear the call for a vote and then go at the end when they got a second chance at it were those who were brave enough to vote against him after he had already lost.
Okay. Well, that gives you an indication.
There's some other thing I'm not understanding about how that works.
I think you got it. But yeah, so some people waited until it was too late and he had lost too many votes and then voted against him, which could be, it depends how you read the tea leaves, right? It could mean that they could be forced into voting for him at some point later, or, and
everybody else said when you asked him, he's going to lose another 10 votes. I know 10 votes right now that he's going to be yes on the first ballot and no on the second. I know one that's going to be no on the first ballot and yes on the second, because that guy had already announced that that's what his plan was. It's a protest vote, but when the second ballot comes along, I'll vote yes. We'll see if he actually does. Everybody else was saying privately he's losing votes, not gaining them, just like Scalise, and that's why, he's doomed.
Okay. It'll be, there's as many answers and reasons for doing what they're doing as there are votes being cast, and you're not even sure how many votes are being cast, because some people don't cast them until the end. But you can duck
the
out
guy
that
way.
Said
from California, Doug LaMalfa said, I'm switching my vote to Jordan. Gus Villarikas was at a funeral. He wasn't there for the vote. He'll be there. He's a Jordan supporter.
Okay.
David Joyce, who is from the great state of Ohio, I don't know if they call it the Ohio.
Yeah.
He's from Ohio. He's the one that's going to put Patrick McHenry's name into the pot if Jordan doesn't get it on this ballot this morning that's supposed to be at 11 o'clock. We'll see if it is.
Yeah.
Also, people who voted for Jordan, Ohio, like Ann Wagner, Marionette Miller Meeks of Iowa,
3M.
Beth Van Dyne of Texas, Drew Ferguson, Georgia. These are people that might have voted yes and might vote no.
Okay.
So
see.
It'll be a very interesting vote if the vote takes place.
Yeah. Okay. I guess there's still some possibility they call it off.
Then votes, you may not do it.
Right. You might want to count it ahead of time. But that's a very high number to count
so we don't know what's going to happen.
Right. If you're not good at counting and you got to count to 200, it's a bit of a challenge.
Right. Now, here's another aspect of this, which is sort of interesting to contemplate. Part of the argument for going with a guy like Jim Jordan, if you're willing to overlook the insurrection and the fact that nobody likes him and he's never gotten a bill passed and he can't raise money, if you're willing to overlook that and say we'll do it for the sake of party unity because we look bad if we can't get somebody, you might say, as some of them had, look, you really need to vote for him because everybody on the hard right likes him. So he's the only one that could actually keep them in line.
It's a theory.
And that theory was blown apart by the fact that everybody on the hard right was trying to intimidate those who were not on the hard right. And they looked at each other and said, if the argument is that he can't keep everybody in line, why am I being bothered by all of these people trying to intimidate me? Well, he's not keeping them in line.
Well, I have bad news for you about the hard right moderates. That's
but
what
they got
think
together and said, you know what, we're not voting for him, and we're not going to change our vote.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that that's the case. I hope it remains the case. The news, again, for you is that's what hard right Republicans mean by staying in line. They are in line. They're in line. They've been asked to force everyone else into line, and they're going to kill you if you don't get in there. That's lining up.
Oh, I thought it was, if you're running for speaker, stay in line. Don't get in line. You have a right to be speaker even when the voting has stopped. If you're already in line, stay in line.
No.
They meant something else.
Yes. towing the line. And,
Okay, got it.
Okay.
So, but listen to these headlines. This is a playbook this morning from Politico. Revenge of the Squishes.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
And then their subheading is the spinal column. It's a column about the spinal column. By any measure, House Republican centrists are an endangered species. Thank you for not calling them moderates. As the GOP has drifted steadily right, their ranks have steadily thinned. But it's about keeping your head down, building the relationship, and making the compromises that, quote, moderates, end quote, in scare quotes, make, that have kept American democracy on track for 247 years, says the suck-up at Politico who wrote that. For that flexibility and their willingness to fall in line behind party leaders, they've earned themselves a sneering nickname from their own colleagues, squishes.
Oh, my. See?
So when Jim Jordan, godfather of the conservative hardliners, won the Republican nomination, you'd be forgiven for expecting them to, squish.
Yeah.
As one GOP aide put it to NBC Sahil Kapoor, either he gets it or the moderates for the first time ever grow a spine. But it turns out moderates have vertebrates.
Temporarily.
They have spinal columns. Among the 20 Republicans who opposed Jordan's bid includes people like Jen Kiggins from Virginia. That would be Virginia 2, down in the Hampton Roads area.
Okay. Virginia, I don't know. Where? I don't know her.
She replaced a Democratic moderate.
Well, that could happen in Hampton Roads area.
Elaine Luria, I think she replaced him.
Okay.
Mike Lawler. Kay Granger was the Appropriations Committee chair who stood fast. The adults are fed up. So the moderates and the squishes stayed unsquishy.
That's good. And, all right, so good exercise for them to do that, when they're being threatened by the speaker's people in the wake of a place that we've been where threats meant actually taking over the Capitol. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We have the requisite number of votes to proceed into the second segment.
Right.
That's because we're very popular.
So I called the previous question. And, the thing about this.
What was it?
I don't know.
Wait, so where were we? The previous question was always, what were we saying before?
I'll call them up and I'll call this one up too.
Okay.
Let me tell you about some of the standing ovations that happened yesterday.
Okay.
One of them was on the Republican side when Elise Stefanik put Jim Jordan's name into nomination.
Okay.
She said, I am reminded of the Book of Esther for such a time as this. Oh, by the way, he was a really great wrestler. And I want to remind all of you about his wrestling career and all the connotations about his wrestling career. If you don't know who Dr. Richard Strauss is, I remind you to go Google it. She was really good at that.
Okay, Book of Esther. I did hear about that, and I didn't understand it, and I still don't. Now that you've told me how she brought that up, the Persians were big on wrestling. Is that what this was about?
The other standing ovation that came about that people were sort of surprised and pleased about was when Mary Peltola nominated or voted for Hakeem Jeffries rather than Jim Jordan.
Okay.
She did not say because, Hakeem Jeffries is pro-fish, although she was probably thinking that.
Yeah.
But a really heartfelt standing ovation for her. Some people may not understand why.
Okay.
It's because her husband died in a plane crash about a month ago while delivering moose meat. It's Alaska, folks.
Oh.
And it was a hunting trip, and he was delivering meat, and the plane went down. And that was from her colleagues, and they really appreciated her being there because she's still in mourning, and the vote for Jeffries because the Democrats had 212 members, and they had 212 votes for Jeffries.
Mm-hmm.
So they were in array, unlike, let's say, Republicans.
Yes.
And as our friend Dana Hool pointed out, if you take all the votes, the 15 for Kevin McCarthy, for example, and then these few this past couple of days, Hakeem Jeffries has probably gotten more votes for Speaker than anybody in history.
Yes, maybe. I mean,
if you had them
keep
all up,
voting it over and over
he keeps
again.
getting 212 every time, so just multiply that by the number of votes there have been.
Yeah, I wonder about that. Although now I think maybe there's probably some long-term Republican minority leaders who, well, over the years, they, Bob Michael was voted for Speaker many, many times as well.
Yeah.
But okay, this is
they
better
didn't have a lot of
because
Republicans.
It sounds truthier. Yeah, plus also Hakeem Jeffries.
I mean, the 15-vote one on McCarthy alone probably equals the careers of just about all the other folks you could think of.
Oh, yeah.
And then he broke the record this week.
All right. Well, yeah, we should. We'll look into that. Let's have someone else look into that. How about that?
All right. This is from Politico. Jordan's floor failure strengthens private push to empower McHenry. Bipartisan group is advocating for more powers for the acting speaker, possibly as soon as a second failed ballot today. Oh. That's if they allow a failed ballot today.
Yes, right. Well, they may fail to allow a failed ballot. That's
Dave Joyce, Republican Ohio, who leads the group of self-described pragmatic Republicans, wants to work with centrist Democrats to elevate McHenry at a certain price. And that was reported a while ago. So they want Israel and Ukraine funds to be loosened and maybe get something on the CR. Price. They don't have to go all the way for, power sharing, committee stuff. You can allow us to have a certain number of bills. They don't need all of that. They might ask, but they're not going to get those. But what they might get is just some simple stuff and then give McHenry 45 days to do it.
Sure. If you want to approach it cautiously, I remind everybody that, they can do anything they want. There's more or less work to do if you want to do it piecemeal. But as I discussed at some point with Joan, the House is already routinely in the business of passing literally, a new package of rules for the consideration of every single bill that they bring to the floor. You could just do the same and essentially throw into each rule, and Patrick McHenry gets to be the speaker for this one. And then, right. and that's it. That's all it would take.
There was a funny sequence that somebody had pulled off. I think I sent it to you. I think Ringwist pulled it off, and I sent it to you on Twitter of the House of Commons.
I don't go there. Yeah, okay.
And what they were doing is they were trying to pass en masse about, 23 or so amendments. So the reader was, at the podium and said, so the question, we're suggesting that the ministers tried to pass
there it is.
Amendment 1, 3, 7, 9, 14, 27, 32, 97, 103, 72, and they had about 18 of them.
Okay.
And then as soon as she finished, she said, and the second reading is, and then they read the whole string of numbers again.
Okay.
Only faster. And you have to imagine it speeding up like either a Benny Hill picture or maybe your favorite auctioneer.
Sure.
And then finally she gets to, okay, formally, the question is amendments 1, 3, 7, 14, 27, 30, and gets them all in.
All right.
To a standing ovation.
Cool.
And then I don't know if it was passed or not, but that's not really.
Yeah, who cares?
Sometimes you can do these things en masse,
Yeah.
in their system. I don't know if we can do it in our system.
We can. Unblock. That's what we call it. Same thing.
Unblock. That's the term.
Yes. But yeah, it's a different style of doing the readings, to be sure. But yeah, you can offer on block amendments. And by the way, you can offer, I mean, I think you can, consider, military nominations on block too, hint to the Democrats. You still have to get past at least one filibuster, but once you get there, you can handle nominations on block if you want to.
Right.
Just
so
letting you
as
know.
Tim points out that on Hannity's show yesterday,
Yes.
after being accused of attempting to intimidate Republicans into voting for Jordan for Speaker because it was Hannity's staff that was calling them and trying to strong-arm them,
He had no time for it himself, clearly.
Hannity accused Hakeem Jeffries and AOC of intimidating Republicans who voted against Jordan.
Yes, I'm sure they were very worried about getting calls from AOC.
So I don't know about that.
Okay, I'm saying...
Anyway, that's where it stands. Jeffries got a lot of votes, but he will not be the speaker. He does have some bargaining power. It remains to be seen whether that does him any good. Jim Jordan will not be speaker. Steve Scalise will not be speaker. Some of the Republicans want to bring Kevin McCarthy back. I don't think there's an appetite for that because the same 8 people that hate him on the Republican side still hate him on the Republican side, so you can't get enough Republican votes to make him speaker again.
All right.
And then that leaves Patrick McHenry, and that's probably where we're going to wind up. How do you do that? You have to do it with Democratic votes. And so if you're going to do it with Democratic votes, Democrats have to get something, and the question is, do they get much? We don't know. Remains to be seen. We shall see. So that's all I have to say about the speaker.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't know anything else until 11 o'clock, and at that time we still may not know anything.
Right. All right. I can handle not knowing.
Other topics? This
Are
is
there any?
Nathaniel Rakish from 538 saying, we just got the first poll in a while of issue number 1, abortion rights in Ohio. Pro-abortion rights leads 58-34.
Hey.
And it's a really, really interesting poll.
Yeah.
It's an issues poll. And, of course, you know, there's a lot of questions about polling in general, but when the margin is that big, it generally tells you something. And I was looking at the crosstabs.
All right.
There's also an issue number 2 on marijuana, and it turns out both of them are popular.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So they have the usual, you know, what do you think about Joe Biden and all that sort of stuff. But
What do you think about
if
Joe Biden
you
on marijuana?
go to the crosstabs and look at who supports issue number 1 on abortion, it's kind of interesting.
Okay.
Okay. How will you vote in the election, first of all?
I will
Overall,
use a pencil.
17.4% will vote by mail early.
I see.
27% will vote early in person, and 51% will vote in person on Election Day. So just so you know, in general, it looks like half of the vote will be on Election Day and the other half won't.
That's fraud.
So it'll give you an idea when you get the results of the numbers coming in early on Election Day from the early vote, because they already tabulate that, if that's the way they do it in Ohio, because everybody does it different. In some states they go first, in other states they go last,
Right.
you know, Pennsylvania versus how they do it in Georgia. But half of the vote's on Election Day. So if it turns out the early people lead by a lot, that tells you how much on Election Day Republicans would have to, you know, how
Chuck
well they'd
would.
have to do in order to make up. But on this poll, okay, Issue 1 is an amendment to the Ohio Constitution which would protect the right to reproductive freedom. If the election were held today, how would you vote? Yes, 58.2, no, 33.5. Okay.
But
And
when will you vote?
here's the interesting stuff. Males, yes. That is to say, would you protect the right to reproductive freedom with this amendment?
As a male.
As a male,
Yes.
55.5 yes, 35.8 no, 61% female, 31.1 no.
Okay.
Okay. Under 50, 67 yes. over 50, 52, yes. College degree,
It's closer, but okay, yeah.
59% yes,
Pretty strong.
if you have one. And if you don't have a college degree, 58% yes.
All right.
See, the point is, this is strong across all of the categories you might look at.
Yeah, even where it was weakest, the 52 is an overwhelming number for a closely divided nation or whatever.
Right. Overall, Democrats 88.9 to 6.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Independents 51 to 36. And only Republicans don't like it 40 to 52.
Not even overwhelming numbers. Well, that's actually a pretty large margin, but still, 40-something% going the other direction.
Yeah.
That's
now,
a winner.
Urban, 73-19, or 73-20, I should say.
All right.
Suburban, 60-34. Rural area, yes, is 47-42. So it even wins in the rural areas.
Yeah, even it doesn't put together a majority, but still a plurality.
Yes.
What are the other people doing? They're still
If you're a gun
driving
owner,
to get to the
yes,
polls.
54 to 38.
Okay.
I mean, everywhere you look,
That's
the only people that
sounds
loses
like
are
they want that
evangelicals.
yeah. And yet here we are saying closely divided, contentious, something, and maybe you shouldn't even be allowed to put this on the ballot. And
Or if we do, we have to change the nomenclature so that you don't know what's going on.
Right, it's pretty clear that everybody in Ohio wants that. No, okay, not everybody, but enough to say, yeah, well, we asked everyone in Ohio, and the vast majority say yes, and that's what we do in this country. So yes.
Yeah, not if you're Frank LaRose.
Right.
The
Or
Republican Secretary of State in
what's
Ohio
a
who
vote,
likes to
really?
cheat.
Yeah. Where did he learn that? So the people voted and they said they wanted this thing to happen. But what is a vote really? I mean,
Yeah, and so what if we
maybe this
change the
piece of
wording
paper
on
is a
it so that
vote.
people don't really know what it is?
Yeah.
How about we do that?
Or suppose
I mean,
just
first we
say,
tried to make it so that you can't even do this unless there's like 90 to 10, majority. Oh, that didn't pass? Okay. Let's change the wording to say, when you say yes, you mean no.
Yeah, or every time you write down yes, actually it's not only no, it's two no's.
Yeah.
How about that? And these people here certified that they actually voted in the election. Now, they're from Arizona, so it's a little weird, but they certify it, so we're asking Mike Pence to say that they lost. Okay, sure. It's a theory.
So the next story I
Both
have
sides.
here is I just found it interesting.
That's enough for me.
It doesn't mean anybody else will, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. I'll take that chance.
It has to be enough for me. It's
I'll
coming.
take the plunge. Okay. It just attracted me because it's in Puck and I saw the headline. And it's called Death of a Salesman.
All right. You should
And
write
it's all
a play.
about the brief rise and rapid fall of Vivek the Fake Ramaswamy.
Okay.
And I thought, oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I like that.
And so basically what it says is the brief rise and rapid fall of Ramaswamy is a pretty good indicator that even in the chaotic universe of Republican politics, with its shameless demands and perverse incentives, certain rules still apply. And among them, people have to like you.
Yeah,
Nobody
Jim
can
Jordan.
stand this guy. They all think he's a callow, shameless huckster who doesn't belong on the stage with them. Nikki Haley in particular, but everybody.
That
Chris
is
Christie,
odd.
you name it, they think he doesn't belong there.
I feel like they just elected a president like that, though.
But people like
But
Trump.
there's
It's
only
funny.
there's
Nobody
only room for
likes
one.
this guy.
He should dance the way Trump does.
So whatever. But his flash in the pan presidential campaign was already well on the way to its predictable end, a forgettable single-digit finish in Iowa, followed by a pledge of fealty to Donald Trump. But Sean Hannity, of all people, put an early nail in his coffin last week on Fox News. Hannity asked Ramaswamy about comments he had made in a separate interview with Tucker Carlson suggesting Nikki Haley's support for Israel was driven by financial motives. Ramaswamy tried to dodge. And Hannity said, stop right now. You do this in every single interview. You say stuff, then you deny it. You deny your own words. So, why don't you just own what you say and stand by it and stop playing games?
Okay.
You go on these shows, people quote your exact words. You deny your own words. I'm saying if you're going to be your presidential candidate and I give you your exact words, either own them or give them back. And then he ended the interview.
That is reasonable.
Yeah, it is. Everybody should do that with these clowns.
Wow. Yeah, and then you should intervene in the speaker's race with your
So
staff.
the article goes on to say you have to be a special kind of person to make Sean Hannity look like Edward R. Murrow. But the point is they have to like you. Nobody likes Jim Jordan. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. It actually is relevant to the speaker's race.
Aha. Right. And I don't know whether he's dodging things, but I can imagine that. Well, he's dodging responsibility for the abuse of the wrestlers at Ohio State. Why don't you just own it? You heard Sean Hannity.
Right. And then I should mention this just for completeness sake. I don't know if you were aware, but
Me neither.
Ukraine is starting to use ATACMS, which are the long-range missile munitions that the U.S. supplied to them last month.
What's the name of it? ATACMS?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what their the
like a breakfast
abbreviation
cereal.
reads as.
Very good work on the acronym ATACMS, because that
Yeah,
makes sense.
ATACMS,
ATA
long-range
CMS.
guided missile.
Okay. CMS.
Yeah.
Some missiles.
There was an argument about this. We can't give this to them because they could reach Russia. It might escalate. Do you remember that whole argument?
Oh, yeah. No. But I believe it happened.
They're called ATACMS.
That's great. It
And
sounds
that's
like
what they did. They attacked them.
And
it turned out
it sounds perfect.
they took out more Russian.
mollycoddleums.
They took out the Russian Air Force. At least at this one base that they hit. They just got
So
everything.
We were like, don't give them to them because they could do that, and then we gave them to them and they did that.
Yes.
Oh.
And so, had we given it to them earlier, perhaps the war would be shorter. But Ukraine continues to do well. In the other war, of course, we had that horrible situation with the hospital in Gaza yesterday, where
Yes.
people were killed. We don't know how many people were killed.
We don't know.
We don't
anything
know
about
who
this.
did it.
This is crazy.
Immediately, Israel was blamed by Hamas. Hamas is not to be trusted. IDF, the Israel Defense Force, said we didn't do it. They're not necessarily to be trusted either. However,
Yes.
independent, non-Israeli, non-Hamas sources say it's not really clear what's going on, but the evidence this morning says Shoshank Joshi in Britain is not conclusive by any means, but points more toward a failed rocket launch and an Israeli airstrike. That means Hamas. Last night's rush to judgment, including by major regional powers, was premature, cynical, and irresponsible. More evidence still needed. That's where that stands. Meanwhile, Biden is on the ground in Israel this morning at 9 o'clock as your show started.
How dare
it's,
they?
It's not my show. It's your show. Unless you
Right.
like it, in which case it's our show. But it's really David's show. It's, the moment that your show started,
Your show.
Biden was meeting with families of hostages, leaders, and other people in a really, really heart-wrenching, deeply emotional discussion with them and Blinken. And it was really, it was broadcast on NPR and broadcast on MSNBC where I saw it. So, quite a bit of play. I saw graffiti in Tel Aviv with Biden portrayed as Captain America with Biden's face.
Okay.
I mean, the point is that he's probably more popular in Israel than he is here right now. And the question is going to be, how does he use that capital, and can he talk about constraint and with the horrible situation at the hospital? And we don't even know how many casualties there were. The only reports we have are from Hamas.
It's normal. I mean, it's
And
chaotic.
we don't know, but it wasn't good.
No.
It did happen.
It was a large number.
And hopefully a large number of casualties. The only possible good that can come out of it in a horrible situation is maybe it'll push a little bit more restraint on everybody, at least for a little bit, at least while he's there. And maybe he could use some of that capital of popularity to talk about more restraint. But, we'll see how that goes. A lot more news from there, and I don't really have a whole lot more to say. But the relevant images that are being analyzed are from the Quds news network, which is Hamas related. And it looks like there was a small, not large explosion in the parking lot next to the hospital, not the hospital itself.
I see.
The pictures show an exploded area, but cars next to it or near it are not exploded, so it wasn't that, high a munition. It's just a lot of uninformation going on right now.
That's a new term.
Based on what I've seen, it
see
appears as though it was done by
making
the other
sense.
team, not you, said Biden to Netanyahu this morning. But there's a lot of people out there not sure. He didn't answer shouted questions about the matter. Hamas rockets certainly could have done this, but we don't know. And so more to come.
Those rockets aren't always that. Well, they've made bigger and more powerful rockets over the years. That's
Yeah, but they don't always go where
case,
you shoot them.
No. But like a couple of years ago, you would, I think, have been able to say, no Hamas rocket is large enough to have caused this big an explosion. But these days, that's not true anymore. They've gotten better rockets. They've got some imported from the outside. They've made and manufactured their own with bigger and stronger payloads. Yeah. Well, I hope they may never sort this one out because this is going to be everybody has a huge
two
interest
things
in
can be
blaming
true.
the other side.
The truth of the matter may ultimately be determined by forensics, and the truth of the matter may not matter because it's inflaming and upsetting anybody and everybody anyway.
Yeah, that's a likely outcome. They find out what the truth is,
but
and
we still need
you know
to
what?
know
This is not really all that good. This doesn't help clarify.
It doesn't help. If it puts a lid on violence because people are so upset about it, that's okay. But otherwise, not good.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it coming out that way too, right? You say, all right, well, now we've dug to the bottom of it, but the misunderstanding we had before has had the effect of tamping down on the violence. Do we want to reveal what the truth is only to, have another round of violence over it?
Right.
No. I guess not.
So there's that. So last country in our world tour that we're going to deal with today simply mentioned of Poland. We did talk about the election on Monday. Turns out, that's what happened.
Okay. They had one.
The ballots were finally counted. It confirms the unexpectedly clear victory of the opposition. Taniel notes turnout was record high. We talked about that, but especially among women after a campaign where abortion bans were a major issue. So again, confirming all the stuff that we talked about.
Ohio and Poland. A lot of Polish extraction in Ohio, right?
So here in the U.S., a mention of something that does not get enough play, and I don't understand why. Trump is on trial in New York City right now. I think he was there yesterday. He expected to confront Michael Cohen, and it turned out Cohen was sick, so wasn't there. So he had to confront his accountant.
Well, why not?
Who said, stuff. So this is from Adam Kleisfeld, who's following this at Messenger. Trump trial bombshell, and this is from a day ago. Witness testifies Alan Weisselberg told Trump Organization executive former president wanted his net worth to go up. Patrick Bernie's.
Me too. I want mine.
Trump Organization executive Patrick Bernie's testimony fulfills the vow from the New York Attorney General's opening statements about what it would show during the trial. Grilled by an attorney for New York Attorney General Letitia James, the company's assistant vice president, Patrick Bernie, agreed that Weisselberg told him that Trump wanted to puff up his net worth in order to, get listed higher on what is it, the Forbes 400 or something like that. Did Weisselberg ever tell you Donald Trump wanted his net worth on his statement to go up? Yes. The exchange marks the fulfillment of a vow in arguing Trump, his family members, and business associates fraudulently inflated his assets and financial statements. Elie Mystal was looking at this on Twitter, and he said, just watch the trial. Trump's evaluation of Mar-a-Lago is like doubled since the trial started. That's exactly why he's on trial.
He can't stop criming even during the trial.
Yes.
Even though
that's not being talked about. Yes, I know there's speaker stuff. Yes, I know. Of course, Israel and Hamas being at war is a big deal.
Well,
but the guy's on trial, and he's losing. Yeah.
You're supposed to bring it up.
And it's for fraud. And it's for lying about who you are.
Yes. And, there's a courtroom action happening on the other side of the pond, as we say, back where they were considering en bloc amendments. And there's developments in that, too.
From which I can... the Steele dossier?
Yes. And
Tell us about
it. We can do a little bit real quick. I think The Guardian has a short piece about it. And the story, if we can condense it, is that Christopher Steele, I guess, is testifying in some capacity here. I think Trump is suing Steele and his company, and that's how they ended up here. But Steele's testimony, long story short here, was that once when Donald Trump declassified information that had been used in the Mueller report about the investigation of his Russia connections, and he declassified it in order to, he thought, prove a point. As it turns out, he didn't prove anything. Trump didn't. But he declassified information that immediately resulted in the disappearance of several Russian intelligence sources that are important both to, what Steele did and, more importantly, to the United States intelligence community. And Steele was just pointing out, hey, last day on the way out the door, he basically revealed more classified information that may have resulted in the deaths of important sources for American intelligence. And it may be one of the days of the biggest damage done to American intelligence operations in a long, long time. And guess what? It was that maybe treasonous, traitorous Donald Trump that did it. But, he didn't use those terms because he's not American, so he can't accuse him of treason necessarily. But, once again, not trustworthy with the classified information. How weird is that? I can't believe someone should charge him with that.
I would just conclude today's segment with this. If you read our media, Biden takes risks in walking the UAW picket line. Biden takes risks with Ukraine. Biden takes risks by going to Israel. Biden takes risks with this or that. They never say, for better, for worse, Biden is leading.
Yeah, that's supposed to be what you do as a leader. He takes occasional risks.
So our media, how do they handle stuff? Well, we got how Trump is covered, including not covering his trial. Yeah. How Jim Jordan is covered, including not covering the Ohio State scandal and the activity on January 6th, which is a big deal.
It is.
The fake Ramaswamy story arc, which was much more interesting than covering January 6th and Jim Jordan and Trump involvement and so on and so forth.
I guess so.
So that's where we are.
Okay.
And here's our music.
And here's the end of your segment for Wednesday. But guess what comes after Wednesday?
Thursday. And I'm going to give you a tease for what we're going to talk tomorrow. It's about the time that British reporters made Boris Johnson hide in a refrigerator.
Oh, interesting. Not
They're
a
aggressive.
Refrigerator.
We're not. That's the point.
Wow.
But I'll talk more about that tomorrow.
Back in the fridge with you, I say. All right. I'm looking forward to it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, so all right, here's the teased information. We'll save it for tomorrow and let Greg tell us about it, but this is pretty interesting. Donald Trump has never had to hide in a fridge. And I'd love to know exactly why he was, why Boris Johnson was hiding in a fridge. But I suspect Donald Trump probably has never had to hide in a fridge, but I suspect he would like to. If he's going to hide, that's where you would expect Donald Trump to hide, not because it's it's the hiding spot of last resort, but for one thing, 9 times out of 10, if you're looking for Donald Trump, you'll probably find him in his civilian life in front of or in close proximity to a fridge. Whether or not there's room in it for him to hide is another question. He's a large man, but Boris Johnson's, not exactly a wisp himself. But, I would imagine if Donald Trump, if you asked him if you had to hide, first of all, I wouldn't hide. I never hide. But if he had to, I guess if, would you hide in a closet? Would you hide under the bed? Do I store any food in any of those places? Is that possible? But is a refrigerator a possibility? Is that if it's on the list, he's going to go where the snacks are. But I assume he would also accept game larder, snack pantry, any of those things. Little Debbie's delivery truck, I would hide in one of those as well. So it's a wide range of places. All right, we'll find out tomorrow. We'll save that one for tomorrow. But for the sake of clarity, because I fear that I may not have done justice to the story of what's going on in the courtroom in England. And, the courtrooms there, They're weird. They work different. There's wigs. You know, if you want to know exactly what's going on there, you would have to read a coherent story about it, not just wing it in summarizing the article, right? So you would, for instance, say, pick up Harun Siddique's piece in The Guardian. Russian sources disappeared after Trump declassified ex-spy's evidence, UK court told. It's a complex story. I got it about halfway right, I think, as I tried to squeeze it in before the break. Here's the real deal. Former MI6 officer's witness statement, that's Christopher Steele, he used to be at MI6, criticizes reckless publication of testimony about ex-president's Russia links. The headline and subheader there, intriguing, but we need more explanation. And here it is. Donald Trump's decision to declassify evidence given by a former British spy, Christopher Steele, about the former U.S. president's alleged links with Russia, right? His information that Steele gave to investigators and, well, a couple other people, including eventually Democratic operations, at least affiliated with Hillary Clinton's campaign. But if you recall the story at least the way I heard it, and I think the way we all heard it, because it's actually true, that Steele was perhaps first engaged by rival Republican campaigns during the primary. And then when they took their lumps and ended up dropping out, Steele had this product available. Is there anybody else interested in finding out more about what a disgusting schlub and possible traitor Donald Trump is? Well, sure, we'll take it. We're the only ones left running against him. We'll have a look at it. Anyway, so Trump's decision to declassify the evidence that Steele gave eventually not only to his clients but to Robert Mueller about Trump's alleged links with Russia led to the disappearance of 2 Russian sources, according to a court document. That court document containing, I guess, the commentary of Christopher Steele. Steele, who used to run MI6's Russia desk, compiled the notorious Steele dossier, and that's enclosed in quotes, investigating Trump's connections to Russia. In a witness statement released on Tuesday, Steele said publication of his testimony to the Mueller investigation on the matter, all right, so not the Steele dossier per se, but when Mueller said, Christopher Steele, I want to talk to you about what you investigated, what you learned, what you did with what you learned, who you gave it to, who engaged you, etc. Tell me all about this stuff and tell me all about what you found. All right, they did. Mueller includes it in his investigation and report, but that part is presumably at least partially redacted and classified. It definitely is classified, presumably redacted because of its classification. So that material, originally classified as secret, was declassified on the last day in office by Donald Trump. And he says, an egregious and reckless act that served no purpose other than to expose me, Christopher Steele, and Orbis, Steele's company, and our sources and our methods. Trump is now attempting to sue Orbis Business Intelligence in England over the dossier, which alleged that he engaged in perverted sexual behavior. Ooh, sounds good. You remember the P-tape. That was at least one of the allegations among them. The one that's most famous, I guess. So Trump is suing or attempting to sue. It's not clear whether he'll be allowed yet. Orbis and I guess Steele, because this dossier alleged that he engaged in perverted sexual behavior and paid bribes to Russian officials to further his business interests. The former president is claiming breach of his data protection rights. That's interesting. And says the dossier's claims against him were false and phony and caused him reputational damage and distress. Yeah. Although the more interesting part is, I mean, in Britain and actually the rest of Europe, even though they've Brexited. Yeah, that's interesting. You have much more robust data protection rights there, and that's an interesting way of putting it. To breach his data protection rights. I'm not certain that it's meant to cover this context, like online data or the online breach of data held, in the consumer context. I understand, but the fact, I don't know if it was meant to cover this kind of data and this kind of breach. Anyway, I guess we'll find out when the British court rules. Now, in his witness statement, Steele said the decision to declassify his testimony taken on Trump's last day in office, not the testimony wasn't taken, but the decision in British parliaments, they say, that's when I took the decision. That's a Britishism. Made the decision is how Americans would deal with it. So in his witness statement, Steele said the decision to declassify his testimony to Mueller, made on Trump's last day in office, resulted in several Russian sources being exposed and suffering, quote, varying consequences. Now, that could be anything in Russia, including falling out of a window, or nothing. He said, 2 of the named Russian sources have not been seen or heard of since. I don't know how public they normally are. And they could be in hiding because once their names were revealed, they may never have shown their face in Russia again. But if they're in hiding, that's important to know and relevant. But the publication of this document did serious damage to the U.S. government's Russian operations and their ability to recruit new Russian sources. The claimant, that's Trump's actions in this regard were truly shocking and arguably constitute one of the most egregious breaches of intelligence rules and protocol by the U.S. government in recent times. Of course, he did it as president, and so he may not be criminally liable for it here in the United States. He's certainly not criminally liable for it in Britain. Although I wonder if does a former American president have any protection if he's I guess you can't charge him, right? He's acting as president. You can't say, yes, a then sitting U.S. president made a decision that compromised British intelligence operations. You can't go and charge a president for using his executive authority he's allowed in the United States to damage British intelligence operations. I'm fairly certain. I guess you could try, but I don't think anybody in America would permit you to put a former American president on trial for that in Britain. Not that you'd ever get a hold of him, but it's an interesting theoretical question. The answer to which is, what? No way. Anyway, but still, he'll get away with it, yes, but it's worth noting that this may be one of, arguably, the most egregious breaches of intelligence rules and protocols by the U.S. government in recent times, followed up almost immediately by the most egregious breaches of intelligence rules and protocols by someone no longer in the U.S. government in recent times, with the documents at Pervalago. Anyway, the statement was released a day after a hearing at the High Court, the result of which will determine whether Trump can proceed with his case against Orbis, which Steele co-founded. In his witness statement released on Monday, Trump had a witness statement too. So Trump's was released on Monday, Steele's released on Tuesday. Now, Trump said bringing the lawsuit against Orbis was the only way. It wasn't a spoken statement, I don't think, but if it was, if he read it out loud, he wouldn't be able to. He'd have to put on his glasses, etc. He'd make mistakes. He'd say that they rammed the ramparts. But the only way that I can fully demonstrate the total inaccuracies of the personal data in the dossier, that's it. I have to be able to sue or else something. He won't be able to prove the total inaccuracies. The dossier, but who cares? What if you're not allowed to? Well, too bad. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be, to me, any equitable reason that demands allowing the trial to go forward, but we'll see what the British say about it. The dossier was published by BuzzFeed in 2017, but Trump accepts that Orbis was not legally responsible for this and is suing over the company's dissemination of that report to 3 individuals. I don't know who the individuals are. Maybe we know this. If you've been following the case, you can suss that out. But you can see that Trump's cobbled this suit together and is trying to thread the needle legally in ways that might make it make it a very narrow case, and he's not going to get a whole lot out of it. And it might end up being essentially useless, like most of his attempted lawsuits. Now, Orbis, which is seeking to have the claim struck out or struck down, thrown out of court, basically, before it goes to trial, argues it has been brought too late and for the illegitimate purpose of harassing Orbis and Mr. Steele and pursuing long-standing grievances. In his witness statement, Steele suggested Trump's discovery of Steele's friendship with Trump's daughter. Did we know this? We probably did. But it's been a long time since we had to think about Christopher Steele. So Steele suggests that Trump's discovery of Steele's friendship with Ivanka had damaged their father-daughter relationship, deepening his animus toward me. And it is one of the reasons for his vindictive and vexatious conduct toward me and Orbis. That's an interesting twist as well. In his witness statement, Trump said Ivanka was completely irrelevant to the case anyway, adding any inference or allegation that Mr. Steele makes about my relationship with my daughter is untrue and disgraceful. Unless, of course, the allegation that he's making is that you have said you wanted to date her and I think called her, I believe, a piece of ass at some point on the radio with Howard Stern, if I'm not mistaken. But that part is true and disgraceful, you see. Orbis also argues that any damage to Trump was done by the BuzzFeed publication, for which it was not responsible, and highlights that Trump's declassification of the Mueller investigation records led to further public consideration of the dossier's contents. That's interesting. So that, their whole thing is, you're suing me because you say your reputation was damaged by the contents of the dossier. Well, we didn't release the dossier. BuzzFeed did. And to the extent that I discussed it with anybody else, it was with Mueller, and he classified it. You declassified it. So any reputational damage based on what's in my dossier is either BuzzFeed's fault, for which you can't sue me, or your own fault, for which you can't sue me. And that's why they're having to go to court to even decide whether Trump's case can even be brought. So that's where we are with this. Robert Mueller's report on Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election made clear that the Trump campaign was receptive to offers of assistance from the Russians, but it did not find any evidence of a criminal conspiracy, allegedly. I mean, I think it actually did. It just didn't, he wasn't moved to file charges based on it, but he left that up to others. The judge's decision on whether Trump's case against Orbis can go to trial will be made at a later date. That's the way time works. It's linear. So they were just reporting that the witness statements were released, and I guess based on those statements and other things, a judge will make a ruling at some point later on. Well, okay. I mean, I think we expected that much. All right. Pardon me. Needed to take a short break there. But we're back. No, unscheduled break in today's proceedings. All right, let's run back and see what else we have in store for you in Pocket. There are any number of directions we can go in. There's a new ProPublica piece that's not about Clarence Thomas, at least not per se, and seems like it might be worth diving into. Have we got the time for it? We might be able to fit it in. Probably not before the break. It looks like a rather lengthy piece. Maybe we'll save it for after the break. Other things to share with you. Here's something interesting happening in another corner of Virginia. I don't have an eye on everything that happens in Virginia, but This is kind of localized, but has national implications, and I thought it might be of interest to you. Might not otherwise reach your eyes or ears. The Daily Progress, the newspaper in the Charlottesville area, has this news, reporting on a local school board race, which, much in the news these days. And as a matter of fact, I think we have something else just basically about, but we've covered this, the news that, yes, a lot of super important races are happening on the local level, school boards, et cetera, with people, campaigning on book banning platforms, on classroom censorship platforms, et cetera, et cetera. Well, no exception here, except that this has some weird twists to it. So one of the candidates for school board in Albemarle County, which is where Charlottesville, Virginia is located, is a woman by the name of Meg Bryce. That's how she's referred to in the headline anyway. Meg Bryce says, not everybody agrees there is systemic racism. Jason Armesto reporting for the Daily Progress in this one. Why bring it to our attention if, for instance, we don't live in Albemarle County, or I don't even live in Albemarle County? Usually, sometimes I can press Loudoun County news on you, but why this one? Well, let's get on with it and see if we can spot the issue. Meg Bryce, a candidate for the at-large seat on the Albemarle County School Board, says the existence of systemic racism is still up for debate. Well, I'm sure Republicans agree with that, but many Democrats probably not so much. Now, her opponent, Allison Spillman, says even toying with the idea that there are not institutional practices and policies that favor white persons is a disservice to the school children they both hope to serve. That'll be the Democratic approach to things. Do we both sides this thing? The disagreement, which came up during a virtual forum hosted by the Albemarle Charlottesville NAACP on October 9th. Bryce's approach not likely to win over many fans in the NAACP crowd, right? But, well, this disagreement has only served to highlight the differences between the more conservative Bryce and the more liberal Spillman, who, as school board candidates, do not run as Republican or Democrat. At the forum, Bryce and Spillman were asked, should public schools teach about the history and effects of systemic racism? Bryce answered that schools should focus on racism, yes, but not systemic racism. This is an interesting line for people to draw, but you should expect, very often these days, the Republican-leaning candidates anyway will just flat out say, no, you shouldn't teach about racism. We shouldn't discuss race at all. Racism doesn't exist anymore in this country, and so therefore, And then the slightly more realistic Republican-leaning candidates among them will say, well, sure, there's racism, but it's not systemic racism, i.e. you can't blame all white people now or then for doing it. Racism is bad, and we're trying to get rid of it, but this idea that you have to go any further than saying, well, look, we let black people vote now, so what else do you want, is, where they draw the line. Oh, you want us to actually, try and undo racism that still exists and get rid of the sometimes subtle, sometimes overt effects of what? Systemic racism? Do we want us to be on the lookout affirmatively to make sure that equal opportunity is afforded to everyone? No, we're not going to do that. And it's a sophisticated argument that sometimes works, at least with other fellow Republicans or Republican leaners. And Bryce has the rhetorical tools to make this appear to work. But it's important for other reasons, and we'll get to that in a minute. But here she is saying, well, look, Bryce answered that schools should focus on racism, but not systemic racism. Public schools should absolutely teach about the history and effects of racism. which is now over. Bryce said, and she didn't say which is now over, but that's the implication. When we talk about systemic racism, I think that there needs to be an openness about, not everybody agrees that there is systemic racism, and it has to be okay for people to disagree about that. And I'm sure some Republican leaners view that as reasonable. Well, I don't necessarily agree that there's no such thing as systemic racism, but I understand that there will be people who do disagree about that, and you have to be able to have an open disagreement about it. Of course, and that's the sort of thing you say, well, that's me being reasonable. I'm allowing both sides to present their facts. Now, one of the reasons, though, keep this in mind, right? You hear people use that as a rhetorical device. I'm just being so reasonable. I want both sides presented. Now, but why do you want both sides presented in an open forum? The reason we say things like, well, you should be able to present both sides in an open forum is so that you can get to the truth and people can reach conclusions about what is true and what isn't true. So if you have an open forum where one side says there is such a thing as systemic racism and here is our evidence for it, and the other side says there is no such thing as systemic racism, and here is our evidence for it, and then you evaluate the evidence for its veracity and its persuasive power, and then what? We come to a conclusion. Like in a court of law, we would say, well, yes, we present both sides. Sure, right? Absolutely. And it's an adversarial system. The other side is able to make outrageous, conclusions, but if they can bring the evidence, fine. We'll allow the evidence under certain rules. And then we ask the jury, okay, tell us what the truth is. It's a fact-finding mission. There's a conclusion reached, right? So if both sides bring their arguments and their evidence, the idea is supposed to be that at the end of the day, or whatever term you set on it, you're allowed, the body politic is supposed to reach a conclusion. And presumably, if we're right about this thing, they conclude there is such a thing as systemic racism, after which we should then say, now we have found the facts. And the facts are that there is such a thing as systemic racism, after which the continued claim that there is no such thing as systemic racism is supposed to be objectively false, and you can't make it. But they keep saying, well, but you can just make the same argument and present the same evidence over and over again because the decision made in the court of public opinion has no binding legal effect. You can't tell me I'm not allowed to continue making the same argument. Well, I understand that, but then again, if we're supposed to keep the doors open for both sides to present evidence, then you're supposed to be able to use that evidence to reach a conclusion. It's odd that there's no conclusion reached ever in this process that Bryce is describing. And it becomes more odd in a minute, I guess, when we discuss, I don't know whether they discuss this in this article or not. I'll get to the end and then we'll show why it's so weird that they abandon the courtroom analogy here. Well, we're just leaving it open for everybody to present their evidence and try and convince the jury. So it has to be okay for some people to say, well, I do recognize that racism exists and there are racist people in the system. I don't agree that there is systemic racism, she continued. And I don't think somebody should be shamed into silence for expressing that. And again, that's supposed to be persuasive rhetoric. Shamed into silence, that's a bad thing. But I mean, what do we say about, well, one side says you committed murder. The other side, you, say I did not commit murder. We present the facts, we present the evidence. Both sides are allowed equal opportunity to make their case and present their evidence. We ask the jury what happened. The jury says we find the defendant guilty. And from then on, that person is a murderer. Now, it's okay for them to walk around giving interviews saying, I'm not a murderer. But when you ask people on the street whether they are or they aren't, the answer is supposed to be, well, they're adjudicated guilty, and we're going to do these things based on the adjudication of guilt. You may still believe that they were unjustly found guilty. You can even continue to work for their release, as frequently is the case. Frequently happens both for people who are worthy of that kind of intervention and those who are in fact just guilty but looking to string things out. It happens, but you can't say, this is unfair of you to shame me into prison silence in prison. You can't just shame me into, my loss of liberty and take it away from me. We can. You were adjudicated guilty. I'm sorry, but that rhetoric won't work anymore. Now, Spillman countered that it's not only is systemic racism real, but it still exists in Albemarle schools, bringing it sort of back to that important point. I think we're doing a disservice to all of our children if we even play with the idea that it's not real, she said, following Bryce's answer. I think if we have teachers who are willing to not admit that systemic racism is real, that they are doing a disservice in teaching our kids. And Spillman said that many of the achievement gaps between white students and students of color can be traced back to systemic racism. Now, there's a little bit more to the article, but before I leave you for the break, I want to tell you a little bit about Meg Bryce. You may recognize the connection to the courtroom if you find out that she is Meg Scalia Bryce. Does that make a difference? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So did that change your mind at all, or color what was happening in your head here about the argument that Meg Bryce was making about the idea that there was no such thing as systemic racism, that she is actually Meg Scalia Bryce? Yes, that's Scalia. By the way, if you had some questions maybe about, that makes me wonder, for instance, whether does Meg Scalia Bryce have any kids in the public school system for which the school board she's running for? The answer is no, but she once did, and I guess her excuse in the whole thing. Now, Spillman, as they point out, mother of 5, all of whom attend Albemarle County Public Schools, as she and other Bryce critics routinely point out, Bryce's 3 children now attend private school after Bryce pulled them from the public school system. But she answers that charge by saying, well, yeah, sure, but they used to attend public school, but I lost faith in school leadership, as it says here, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and came to believe administrators were not listening to parents, jumping on the Glenn Youngkin thing. That belief ultimately led her and her husband to withdraw their kids and spurred her run for office. She's saying, I'm fighting to represent the people that feel that the district has lost its way, Bryce said in September. So that's the situation. I just wanted to sort of point that out, and also point out the weird, I don't know, is it really a logical fallacy? I don't know if we've gotten it risen to that level. But certainly the weird idea that in the court of public opinion, there needs to be room for both sides to make their arguments and da-da-da, and that's just sort of the liberal tradition, and they use that to strong-arm their way into the conversation with stuff like there's no such thing as systemic racism. But if there's going to be a courtroom of public opinion, we are meant to reach a conclusion and to enforce that conclusion afterwards. Does it mean, but, they try to duck the verdict by using rhetoric like, I don't think I should be shamed into silence. Well, I don't know whether anybody's shaming you into silence or not, but you should be, the entire, say, judicial system, if you have any interest in that as a Scalia or otherwise, is about reaching a conclusion. And I guess that's another way of saying shaming people into silence, but that there's supposed to be some societal understanding that so long as the law is applied equally and fairly to all, we're supposed to respect the conclusions, especially the conclusions reviewed by courts of appeal and decided on matters of pure law at the appeal level, at the appellate level. And I don't know. I mean, like, for instance, your dad is sort of famous because he occupied one of those positions that we're just supposed to listen to because there's a societal agreement. Now, for instance, do you think it's fair that people ought to be shamed into silence by gun enthusiasts when they say, I feel that the Supreme Court erred horribly in its recent gun rights jurisprudence, and in particular in Scalia's decision to reinterpret the Second Amendment to mean that there's an individual right to bear arms for personal protection on the streets of America, not against invading foreigners, not against government tyranny, but against street crime or their perception of street crime or what they think might look like a street crime which demands their intervention, even though it really isn't and doesn't. I think that's all wrong, but to the extent that we as a society say, well, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the land and they decide what constitutional interpretation will prevail until they change their mind about it. And so in the meantime, it's okay for everybody to buy AR-15s off the shelf and, if they feel like it, during their Las Vegas vacation, rain bullets down on outdoor music festivals, slaughtering innocents and mowing down several hundred people in the space of a few minutes. And I'm not talking about that just happening in Israel. We're talking about, reminder, that actually happened here in the United States, in Las Vegas. And we haven't been really very sure what to do about it ever since. But whenever you speak up and they say, you don't even know the difference between a clip and a magazine, you should just stay out of the debate. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand guns. You don't understand freedom. You should be shamed into silence. They're perfectly happy to shame people into silence in that context. They just don't like it very much when it happens to them. And of course, they have this weird idea that once you present evidence to everyone and they come to their own conclusions, you should also ignore those conclusions if they mean I don't get to keep yelling at you. So I found that to be a weird story, and of course a weird angle, and of course a reminder that, your school board elections matter wherever you are. They may not receive national attention. This didn't receive national attention, I guess, until we just brought it up. I don't know whether it really means getting national attention. Being on this show, I mean, people all over the nation listen to this show, but I wouldn't call it national attention. But anyway, pay attention to your local school board races. You never know whether the Meg Bryce, who's, espousing these sorts of odd ideas, if they're odd. We're open to the possibility that they're not that odd, but especially when they're that smooth. And espousing those ideas maybe in your local race, they may be a Scalia too. I don't know. I mean, she followed normal, quote unquote, normal societal protocols in changing her name. She didn't change her name to, Zakin or anything like that. But, there's a little bit more to the story other than her unusual approach to systemic racism, let's say, and her name being Bryce. There's a little extra. So, I was glad to share that one with you. I thought you might be interested in it. How about if we move over to this piece from, let's see. I guess since I brought it up, the ProPublica piece, new on the agenda, but it also means that some of the other things that have been sitting here in pocket are going to continue to be ignored. But hey, Friday's still coming. Hang on, baby. Friday's coming. Who remembers those 1970s and 80s era motivational posters, if they were in fact motivational? I don't know. I found them demotivational, really. But anyway, what's ProPublica? What are they griping about now? Because they gripe about really good stuff. They have excellent gripes at ProPublica. This time, it is the legitimate and righteous indignation of Marilyn W. Thompson. Marilyn Thompson, actually quite a familiar name. Why do we know Marilyn Thompson? Maybe I'm thinking of another Marilyn Thompson. I don't know. But Marilyn Thompson, reporter at ProPublica, has a hell of a track record with them, if I'm not mistaken. You can review her recent work. But I don't know. I maybe think I'm for some reason, the name rings a bell. And it'll continue to ring bells for people, I think, after you take a look at this. This is, I think, the promise of the headline is of a very insightful piece here. The GOP's, you know how we did refer to the GOP here, the GOP's secret to protecting gerrymandered electoral maps? Question mark. What is that? What is their secret to protecting gerrymandered electoral maps? Claim privilege. This seems like a really, like I said, insightful and interesting view of the problem. We love to get into the weeds of things like this and discuss the implications of manipulating judicial process and legal theories in ways that make it difficult to take on what should be facially an obvious problem and an obvious constitutional, if not constitutional violation, then certainly an anomaly that would demand redress. Gerrymandering, like the idea that, like for instance in Wisconsin, we talked about how egregious it is in Wisconsin, and then what they do with the leverage that they give themselves to try to embed themselves and make it impossible, literally impossible, to simply reflect the will of the people ever in any election, no matter what. That's the goal of the gerrymandering, at least in Wisconsin. And arguably it's everyone's goal. It's just not everywhere have they been able to achieve the results of Wisconsin. So how are they doing it? Why can't you go to court and say, duh, everyone knows that, it should be a given that your legislature should reflect the political preferences of the electorate. I said, I guess your electoral bodies should reflect the will of the electorate because, and I emphasized at as though I had said electoral bodies when I had said, in fact, legislature. Anyway, never mind. Sorry about all that. The GOP's secret. Claim privilege. How so? Subheader tells us, through new and expansive assertions of privilege, Republican legislatures around the country are shielding their work on allegedly discriminatory voting maps to prevent the public from finding out how and why they made their decisions. Very rarely do you get an insight that is incriminating, even though you suspect that there is such a motive behind the gerrymandering. You can't find the smoking gun. You can't prove it. But every once in a while it surfaces, as it did in North Carolina, right? When we found they were turned over to us by the guy's daughter, the Republican operative who helped North Carolina Republicans gerrymander their legislative districts, who left notes behind saying, yes, essentially, we have discriminatory intent. We mean to do that. This is what we're trying to do. Here are our notes about how to do it. And the North Carolina Supreme Court said this was done with surgical precision, and we now have the notes that say why they availed themselves of such precision for the purpose of undermining minority representation in the state legislature. Mind you, like I said, the Supreme Court came to that conclusion and said as much. And then Republicans used their gerrymandered power in the state and then used their political machinery to change the composition of the Supreme Court such that they had once said with surgical precision, this basic unfairness has been executed for obviously now on the record racist reasons. But then they changed the composition of the Supreme Court and said, yeah, but we don't care anymore. Go ahead and continue to do it. Because now it's a new Supreme Court in town. The surgical precision, maybe it's still there, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But we don't care anymore. That's the point. And they're not even talking about it, about North Carolina in this piece, I don't think. So, right. So, for instance, the reason I bring up North Carolina is like very rarely are notes left behind like that. And it's usually a tougher question. Prove to me that there was racist intent here. Well, even when the evidence exists, now Republican legislatures are able to make a new legal claim and have it be recognized that even if we find the notes, you're not allowed to use them. Here's the story. Okay, as Marilyn Thompson reports it. Eva, perhaps Bonilla. We'll give it the Spanish pronunciation because they still frequently do that with that surname, even down in Texas. But Eve Bonilla grows furious, when she thinks about how Latino voters are treated by the Republican power structure in Texas. At 74, the small business owner watched the GOP legislature pass a series of measures like a voter ID law that she felt would make it harder for Latinos to cast ballots or run for public office. 2 years ago, serving as the leader of a Hispanic women's group in Fort Worth, she decided to strike back. The Republican legislature had just pushed through a new election maps that carved up Latino communities and made it even harder for them to elect candidates of their choice. That's the usual story with gerrymandering. So Bonilla joined other minority voters as plaintiffs in a federal lawsuit alleging intentional discrimination in the 2021 redistricting plan. I wanted to see the right thing done, and this is just not right, she said. Then Bonilla waited. In 2022, an election came and went with districts based on those challenged maps. Oh, gee, we couldn't get it done in time, so we had to have at least one election. All right, fine. We press on. It has now achieved a dubious distinction. Of the 87 lawsuits filed over the 2021 congressional and legislative redistricting plans nationwide, it has dragged on the longest without having held a trial. As another election looms, a trial date has not even been set. So they redistricted based on the 2020 census. Well, not really based on it. Based on using that data to carve things up in such a way that people would be split into several districts and you would have no Latino district left, or at least very few of them. And then in 2021, they file suit. And in 2022, the election comes and goes. But, the gears of justice, they turn slowly. Surely we'll get this sorted out before the 2024 elections. And guess what? They have not. And it's 2023, and it's the end of 2023 at that. And no trial date set. They're not going to get this fixed for 2024 either. Then pretty soon they'll be, well, maybe we can get it in time for the 2026 elections. And maybe they will, maybe they won't, but bear in mind that in 2030, they'll do another census and this will all start again. And we're going to end up with a cycle of 2-3 elections held under gerrymandered maps. Maybe by the end, they'll get around to fixing some of the maps, but who knows whether they'll be done properly or not for the last 2 elections. But if they can, Republicans, I'm sure, are saying, well, if we can have the majority of elections held under illegally gerrymandered maps, gerrymandered in our favor, and some smaller number of maps held by, or elections held with fair maps in place, at least we have 3 with an advantage for us and then 2 that are neutral. Not, by the way, 2 that are drawn to the advantage of Democrats, 2 that are relatively neutral. So on net, great for Republicans, right? Let's keep going. So now, no trial date even at this point. The reason? Republican leaders asserted their rights to block the most routine give and take of lawsuits, resisting handing over documents, providing discovery, or submitting to depositions. In effect, squashing Bonilla's efforts to uncover how the 2021 maps were drawn. The lawmakers have done so by the rigorous use of 2 forms of privilege: the better-known attorney-client privilege, and what is known as legislative privilege, which allows elected members of state legislatures to deliberate in private. As the Texas case drags on, legislatures across the country are making new and expansive claims of privilege to keep electoral maps in place and prevent the public from finding out how they made their decisions and why. Which is, just a flat-out transparency problem. Unrelated to the electoral map problem that it stems from. Texas lawmakers did not stumble upon these tactics on their own. A national GOP redistricting group helped train Republican lawmakers in Texas on how to approach lawsuits and raised money to pay legal costs. I mean, think networking, like we've all been learning about Leonard Leo and his restructuring of the courts, such that the idea of which is to put in place judges who will be receptive to these claims of privilege. But cross that now with groups like ALEC that teach local and state legislators how to use these tactics, how to introduce bills that will protect their privilege, whether on whatever subject. But when it comes to something like this, okay, well, if the other side decides that what you've done is unfair and takes you to court, here's how to make sure that they never actually get their day in court. But it's all legal because everyone knows that you can litigate over questions of privilege. You might lose. You may not. You got to hash it out in court. Of course, if there's any possibility of you losing, we're going to be working with Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society to make sure that the judges who decide your case decide it in your favor. Wink, wink. And if they don't, that the appeals courts, the Supreme Court later will. So here you go. Texas lawmakers didn't just stumble upon this on their own. There was somebody that trained them on it and raised the money to pay for the legal costs involved. The lawmakers also passed a new law to further protect their deliberations. In addition, they put an outside political operative on the state payroll so that the legislative privilege could shield his activities. Finally, they relied on GOP map drawers who worked for law firms, which allowed lawmakers to assert that the maps were legal advice. Isn't that interesting, right? So you get a outside consultant who will help you draw discriminatory maps and help divide up the Latino communities, but you put him on the state payroll and say, well, that's advice he's giving to the legislature. That's legislative privilege. So his notes can't be admitted in court the way they were in North Carolina. And on top of that, you say, all right, well, I want even more map making advice from my lawyers. And if they happen to say things like, yeah, this will work with surgical precision to prevent Latinos from being able to elect representatives of their own to the legislature, and you said that out loud, and it could be, or it's been recorded in your notes somewhere and it's going to be admitted to court. No. That's now attorney-client privilege, you see. Throughout the whole thing, the Texas lawmakers have contended that they did not discriminate against Latino voters. It just happened to work out that way that there are no Latino districts left. In Louisiana, North Dakota, and elsewhere, Republicans have resisted challenges to their maps by asserting privilege. In Washington, Democrats have done the same. Oh, both sides. There you go. I mean, if you demand that there be a both sides to everything, you can find it. And at least you can say, well, then why don't the Democrats do this? How come they? Well, okay. In some cases, they do. Does that make it okay? Right? No, we're all uncomfortable with it. Legal experts say the expanding use of privilege robs plaintiffs of key insights. To succeed in court, plaintiffs in many cases have to show legislators intended to discriminate. Now, without access to any of this information, right, and what really happened, explained Harvard Law School professor Nicholas Stephanopoulos, it becomes very difficult to prove intent even where it was actually present. Only rarely do you get a break like you do in North Carolina. The concept of legislative privilege is protected under the U.S. Constitution's Speech and Debate Clause, and 43 states have embedded it in their constitutions. Originally intended to protect legislators from criminal or civil claims for things they said on the floor, it has come to encompass lawmakers' work-related communications. In theory, affording such protection allowed for frank conversations. But in the past, people who wanted to scrutinize the legislature's activities had another, if narrower, way to find out what was going on. They could file open records requests to get access to interactions lawmakers had with outside third parties, such as consultants or political operatives. In Texas and elsewhere, Republicans have succeeded in shielding even these once public interactions. Conservative judges in the 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, weird, which covers several states, including Texas, and the 8th Circuit, which covers the Dakotas, have recently sided with state legislatures that have used expanded privilege claims to prevent public review. Recently, Arizona Republicans appealed to the Ninth Circuit to shield their deliberations. And let's just remind everybody, who are these Arizona Republican legislators? They are the ones who put together and funded and supported the fraudit conducted by cyber ninjas to try to overturn the 2020 elections. And I guess their deliberations are now, they hope, will be protected from public view, although they face a harder and higher and steeper climb with the Ninth Circuit than Texas does in the Fifth. Partisan battles have long been a staple of redistricting, which happens every 10 years, sort of, kind of. But as more states craft their new maps out of public sight, the fights are ending up in drawn-out court cases with enormous consequences for voters. The lawsuits are taking so long to resolve that 6 states conducted their 2022 elections under maps that had been ruled illegal, actually got their day in court, ruled illegal by lower courts, according to a recent analysis by the Democracy Docket, or not the, but by Democracy Docket, a progressive website that tracks redistricting cases. We've referred to their work all the time. They await resolution. Lawsuits challenging maps in 7 other states were still awaiting court action when the elections took place. The Texas GOP undertook its map-making effort as the state was undergoing a significant demographic shift. Latinos now slightly outnumber non-Hispanic white people in the state. Wow. Gee whiz. Somebody should write a book about that demographic shift in Texas. And they did. And Republicans read the book and said, well, let's prevent it from having any effect by using gerrymandering and expanded legislative privilege to protect our gerrymanders from being found to be gerrymanders in court. All right, so Latinos now slightly outnumber non-Hispanic white people in that state, and they and other minorities account for almost all population growth in the last decade, according to census data. Many of these new residents will likely vote for the Democratic Party. Through aggressive redistricting, however, Republicans have been able to maintain control of the legislature, all major statewide offices, and the state's congressional delegation. And they grabbed one of the 2 new seats in Congress gained through the population increases. So, I mean, just think about that, right? You were giving more seats to Texas because its population is growing, and almost all of population growth in the last decade has been among minorities, Latino and otherwise. And none of the representation that Texas gained as a result of that population growth has gone to Latinos or the minority population. They're responsible for bringing the state more power. They're just not allowed to share in any of it. How interesting is that? Elections can't really be unwound. You can't go back and change the composition of the Texas legislature from 2002, said Yuri Rudensky, senior counsel with the democracy program at the Brennan Center for Justice, a nonpartisan legal institute. The center represents a separate group of minority plaintiffs who are challenging the state's maps. The Justice Department has joined the plaintiffs. So using discriminatory districts cuts to the heart of our democracy. Keith Gaddy, a former bipartisan litigation consultant, said that in his experience, lawmakers keep their methods secret when they are aggressively, when are they using this sort of secrecy? When they're aggressively gaming the process for political gain, because that would be the worst time to be caught, right? The more egregious the gerrymander, the less information can be made available about the process, he said. It's a nasty, nasty business. And there's an awful lot more to this ProPublica piece. Not that we can get it all in, but I think you got the gist of it and why it should be an interesting read for you. So I definitely recommend this to you. Wait, some more hints here about the plan. Just give you a little bit more as we make our way out of the show today. Redistricting in Texas was 2 years away when leaders of the Virginia-based National Republican Redistricting Trust, that's the group we're talking about, flew into Houston for a poolside briefing for GOP supporters. They can't even do their dirty work in a dismal meeting room somewhere. They have to do it poolside at a resort. So Right. So 2 years ahead of the redistricting, in 2018, they fly into Texas and say, the census is coming. We need to prepare you on how to cheat, how to gerrymander it, and how to drag it out to 2006 before anyone can ever force you to do something as weird and stupid as drawing fair districts. So, they flew in 2018, right? But how long have they been around? Well, you might be interested to know that they were established in 2017 to counter a similar Democratic Party redistricting operation. The NRRT and its nonprofit affiliate, Fair Lines America, because of course their lines are not fair, had many Texas ties. Senior leadership included powerful Texan, you'll never guess who, Karl Rove. No, he hasn't rehabilitated himself by being anti-Trump. Karl Rove, the former White House official and longtime consultant to Texas governors. So, anyway, I guess in closing, I'll just say this much. For people like Roy Tejera, who wrote the book on the changing demographics of Texas and the emerging Democratic majority or blue majority, how did he put it, in Texas, things are going to change. There's a demographic inevitability to it. Well, the demographics are inevitable, but it's not inevitable that the people are actually going to be able to elect the representatives of their choice. We forgot that the Republicans would do everything they could to make sure that democracy never prevails in Texas or elsewhere. And if it does, they'll storm the Capitol, smear feces on the wall, and threaten to hang the vice president, and then make their ringleader the Speaker of the House.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Yes, it all ties together, and if we haven't tied it together for you successfully, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy will do it as Justice Putnam takes over the microphone next. What's he got on tap for you? Well, let's see. The public has to understand what is at stake over a possible Jordan speakership, and I actually think maybe we've teed that issue up nicely for you. Stay tuned.